0 and the recording is starting. So, okay, welcome back. So this is the final part of the lecture on the ACTH adrenal axis, right? Hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, okay? We have touched a lot of information, but this is a very, very important pathway. We're not going to go into the biochemical specific of every single organ because then it will take 2 years to study, but this is an initiation of the regulation of all the body functions, okay? So, as a part of the final lecture, what we have is the regulation of mineralocorticoid secretion under physiological actions. We've done glucocorticoids. Remember glucocorticoids, zona reticularis fasciculata. What about the zona glomerulosa? What happens, right? And what happens is that this zona produces aldosterone, okay, as we saw yesterday. And aldosterone is the physiologically important mineralocorticoid. 11-deoxycorticosterone also has mineralocorticoid action, but only important during conditions that leads to its accumulation in the blood. This is a very busy scheme, but shows you a little bit everything that is going on in the aldosterone that works with the angiotensin and renin system, and the final goal is to act on the kidney to maintain the levels of sodium and potassium and water. So imagine it's really, really important because the kidneys not only filtrate, but the kidneys also have an important role on the mortality of the blood, right? And this needs to be tightly regulated. So, 3 pathways stimulate the glomerulosa cells to synthesis of aldosterone. So, there is one which is the renin-angiotensin system we saw yesterday, which here in this panel is shown in green. So basically is the angiotensin 2 comes from increased obviously signaling in the lung, but also angiotensinogen from the liver, okay? This will affect also the adrenal cortex to produce aldosterone. Aldosterone will tell the kidney to increase the excretion of sodium and decrease the sodium excretion and decrease water excretion and increase the potassium excretion. So that would lead in plasma with less potassium, okay? And then at the same time, these lower levels would have an effective in circulation volume, extracellular fluid volume, and important in blood pressure, which will also signal and affect the renin-angiotensin system. ACTH pathway. So there are 2 pathways converging. One is the blue, the other one is the green. We don't have time in this module, but you will study that in medicine or in a master's if you do more biochemistry and physiology or more biomedical science, how the angiotensin system renin works, but it parallels or feedbacks the ACTH, which is in blue, okay? So, although ACTH stimulates the initial conversion of cholesterol to pregnenolone, remember? So, the cholesterol gets modified. Then this further gets modified to finally produce aldosterone, okay? But the secretion of aldosterone is relatively influenced by ACTH. ACTH starts only the first step of cholesterol to pregnenolone. However, increase in plasma potassium, what you can see here in obviously in the pink or red, leads to hyperkalemia. And then the secretion of aldosterone is also directly stimulated by trauma, anxiety, hyperkalemia, hyponatremia, and inhibited by arterial nuclear peptide AMP. Right? We're not going to go too much deep into this, but what you guys need to know is that the aldosterone affects the kidney, and the kidney, what it does is to control the excretion of sodium, excretion of water, and excretion of potassium, right? So basically, the molality of the blood has a big influence by the kidney, right? This it's affected in the kidney by the angiotensin coming from the lung and angiotensinogen, which also renin system coming from the liver. At the same time, the pathway obviously needs to be activated by the brain CRH, or remember guys, also AVP. Second lecture of the hypothalamus, right? AVP, arginine vasopressin, okay, also has an effect on the kidney, okay, and it also affects the molality of the blood. So the mechanism of actions of mineralocorticoids. It's found in the circulation. Aldosterone is only 50% protein bound compared to cortisol, which is 90% bound. Aldosterone has specific intracellular receptors, right? And they are the, remember guys, intracellular, because they are steroid hormones. Steroid hormones are lipids. They do not bind to receptors in the membrane. They directly pass the membrane, okay? So mineralocorticoid receptors, also called MR, aldosterone receptors, which cause expression of ion channels to be transport the sodium and potassium across cell membranes. Okay, so this is a very easy schematic representation of what is happening when we have in the kidneys the renal. This is the renal interstitial fluid, and those are the principal cells in the kidney, and aldosterone goes through the membrane, finds the mineralocorticoid receptor, which then binds to it, which then goes to the nucleus, and then goes into the mRNA, and then from the mRNA produces proteins, which mainly are the ATP sodium potassium channels, and also the in the membrane, so there is a reabsorption of sodium and potassium. So if we look a little bit more into the physiology, aldosterone stimulates the reabsorption of sodium, and this happens in the distal convoluted tubule in the kidney. You have here a graphical representation of the kidney, and this is the distal convoluted tubule. Okay, so also with some lesser extent in the collecting duct of the tubule, proximal tubule, and ascending loop of what is called the Henle, and in the colon, also in the colon, and sweat and salivary glands. Okay? Now, obviously, this is very important for the levels of sodium potassium in the blood. The sodium reabsorption occurs in exchange for either potassium or H ions. okay? By controlling reabsorption of sodium, aldosterone influences the concentration of sodium plasma, which influences water reabsorption and the effect on ADH secretion. So as you can say, the water content in the blood is super important because it can lead to hypertension, but also dehydration. So this needs to be very, very tightly regulated. You have in this draw what happens in the tube. So this is the distal convoluted tube of the kidney. This is the structure, and you can see these cells, right? And then basically they are aldosterone sensitive portion, okay? And then will enter into the cytoplasm and produce the sodium and calcium channels, which will obviously influence the blood. Bless you, okay? So the interaction of the renin-angiotensin system, aldosterone, and ADH therefore controls blood volume and influences blood pressure. Okay? Now, guys, remember ADH. ADH, antidiuretic hormone, or arginine vasopressin, is another hormone from the posterior pituitary which influences obviously the electrolyte balance, okay? And it's triggered by thirst in the hypothalamus and will tell the hypothalamus to drink, to the body to drink more water, and it also regulates the osmolality through the kidney, okay? Now, this is key to the blood pressure, and if it is defective, as we will going to study in primary aldosteronism, but not in this lecture, in the lectures that are coming, right? This can produce severe cardiovascular defects. So this is again a little representation of how the angiotensin renin system works, right? And how it affects the adrenal cortex, and then aldosterone, right? Also it's in the adrenal cortex, and how basically this works in the exchange of sodium, potassium, and water in the blood. Okay, so at the end, water and salt retention, very important. Also, if we don't have this system, we can die, right? Because we will get dehydrated and we will get hypertension. Okay, so it's very important to know that aldosterone regulates sodium and potassium and molarity of the cells through the angiotensin renin in the kidneys. Okay, so as I said, today was a very short lecture. Through all these modules, we have covered mainly important things of the hypothalamus pituitary. Okay, we have covered the main important tumors of the hypothalamic pituitary axis. Let me stop sharing. We have also covered, very importantly, the effects of the pituitary gland and the diseases of the pituitary gland. You have studied the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis and the metabolism, right? You have also studied the functions of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and within the adrenal you have studied the different zonations, the medulla, okay, and how the medulla influences aldosterone, okay, and the cortex and the hormones that the cortex produce. Remember that in this module we only have done the hormones in the cortex that influences glucocorticoids and also the aldosterone system, okay? But what we have not covered is the androgens. We are leaving the sex hormones for the end of the module when we will study reproductive biology. Then androgens such as estrogen and all the rest will come up. Everything will be linked together. Okay? So far, I would like to thank you for your attendance. Also, I would like to thank you for your very interesting questions. Anything that may arise, please feel free to ask me. I am reachable by email, but also we have one session after if any doubts. Lastly, we have the questions, okay, at the end of each lecture. I will be giving the right answers today, and that will be uploaded into QM Plus, okay, for you to be doing at your own time. Thank you very much and see you next time. Thank you.